Thank you, Robin Williams. I don't know if any of you ever saw that movie, Good Morning Vietnam. All right, so we're going to look at Vietnam Part 2. This is the Gulf of Tonkin, which leads to the Tonkin Gulf Resolution and America's involvement in the Vietnam War. Our essential question: what difficulties did the United States face in fighting a war against, well, both North Vietnam and the Viet Cong in South Vietnam? So as we go through the lesson, we'll explain the difference between the two. So let's look at what eventually gets America into this war. On August 2nd, 1964, the USS Maddox is in the area of what is known as the Tonkin Gulf. And here's the map over here. You can see where they are at. They are doing military game sort of things out here. And 3 North Vietnamese Navy torpedo boats attack the Maddox. And so on this day, there is a definite attack on a U.S. ship, and the Maddox fires back. They also scramble F-8 fighter jets. I'm trying to read my notes as I'm doing this along. It's early in the morning. I'm going to take a little sip of coffee here. There I go. Wake myself up a little bit. 4 North Vietnamese sailors are killed in this engagement, by the way. But this was, again, this whole day, there was a lot of confusion going on. There was a lot of back and forth, not really sure what took place. So 2 days later, on August 4th, the USS Turner Joy goes out here along with the USS Maddox. And supposedly on this day, the 4th, there's a second sea battle. The Turner Joy picks up torpedoes in the water. They believe that there are other ships out here, and both the Maddox and the Turner Joy begin to fire their weapons. Now, this is the incident, August 4th, is the incident that they'll use to say that the forces of North Vietnam have attacked the Americans, that they want to expand their influence, their communist influence into the region, and eventually attack South Vietnam. And this sets off a series of incidents that allows the Johnson administration to basically have his own little war against North Vietnam. But the problem is, it turns out these were all ghost torpedoes. That's that little video clip I showed you from the documentary Fog of War. Turned out that radar was picking up, who knows what they were picking up, weather, probably more than anything else. And the sonar guys looking at that thought it was torpedoes. They panicked, and next thing you know, they believed they were fighting North Vietnamese, but turned out they were fighting nothing. And then America is now involved in a war. Now, Johnson basically has no choice in some regards. He's a Democrat. Remember, he is a New Dealer Democrat. He's about to unleash the Great Society on America. But he also knows that the Republican Party is constantly telling people that Democrats are the ones that lost China under Truman. If you remember, during Truman's administration, China was fighting a communist civil war, and the nationalists that the Americans backed under Chiang Kai-shek, they lose, and they have to leave China. They went to the island of Formosa, which they wind up renaming Taiwan. And China fell to the communists. Well, the Republican Party will always use this as a charge against the Democrats, saying that they are not tough on communists, that they're weak. And so when this happened, this Tonkin Gulf situation, domino theory came back. And Johnson said, I'm not going to be the president who saw Southeast Asia go the way China went. This is also an election year. This is also, you have to remember, 1964 is also the election year. The Republicans have nominated Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater, as we talked about in class, he wants to bomb Vietnam back into the Stone Age. He wants to unleash nuclear weapons if necessary. And so the Republicans seem to be really, really tough, that they're going to stand up to the communists. So this is what's going to force Johnson's hand. He goes to Congress and he asks for what he calls the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, which was a very broad, vague type of resolution that gave the President of the United States basically unlimited power to wage war by himself. He didn't need to get Congress permission. And usually, as we probably hopefully know, in the Constitution it tells us only Congress can declare war. But what this resolution did is it gave the president war powers without a declaration of war. It's what we call a blank check. You might remember that expression during the 100 days of FDR's administration when Congress gave him a blank check to wage war against the Great Depression, and he created all those New Deal programs. Well, now they give Johnson a blank check to go to war against North Vietnam and the communists. And he famously said that this resolution, he says, it's like grandma's nightshirt. It covers everything. And if you think about it, I don't know how many of your grandmas walk around in big nightshirts anymore. That's kind of a thing of the 50s, 60s, 70s, where grandmas would wear these giant I guess we called them muumuus at one point in time, these giant shirts that were like nightshirts. And so it was like grandma's nightshirt. It covered her from her neck all the way to her feet. So that's what he's saying that this resolution is like. It covered everything. It allowed him to do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted to do it. And so that's why that's actually a pretty famous quote. I'd like you to remember that one. He wins the election in a landslide, 1964. Hopefully you remember that. And basically, remember when presidents win landslides, they believe they get a mandate. Right? He's got a mandate to create the Great Society. He's got a mandate now to press a war against Vietnam. And in the following year, 1965, Operation Rolling Thunder is unleashed on North Vietnam. Now again, make sure we understand this. Vietnam is one big country, but it's divided at the 17th parallel line. The north part of Vietnam, that's the communists under the control of Ho Chi Minh. Right? And they have an army, they have a navy, they have an air force. Their army is the Viet Minh, that's what it's called. In South Vietnam, that's a democratically controlled government that is supported by the United States. If you remember in the last video, they had a president there, Diem, who was very corrupt. And eventually in 1963, the military did a coup. And so a new government is there, but it's still a democratically run government. So the United States believes it must protect this democratic government of South Vietnam against the communists. They see this as a war, plain and simple, against communism, against capitalism, communism against democracy, and they feel they have to stop it at all costs. It's Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara who devises this idea that it'll be an air assault. That way you would keep the troops out. This is March 2nd, 1965. They come up with this. And it's round-the-clock bombing of Hanoi. Hanoi is the capital of North Vietnam. They will basically bomb Hanoi from 1965 and starting in 1966 to 1968. It's an ongoing, non-stop, daily bombing of the city of Hanoi. They also target sites along what's called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Ho Chi Minh is the leader of North Vietnam. And again, I mentioned this in the other video, and I keep mentioning this to you so you remember this. There's countries next door to Vietnam. There's Laos and there's Cambodia. And they have this secret trail that goes out from North Vietnam into Laos, down into Cambodia, down in South Vietnam. That way they can bring troops in, they can bring in other things, and so they can fight the South Vietnamese from neighboring countries. Well, the United States also bombs along the Ho Chi Minh Trail to try to stop them from doing that as well. Eventually, they are going to send in the ground troops. By late 65 into 66, it is decided to send in ground troops, and this is what eventually escalates the war. The original reason was to protect the airfields in South Vietnam from attack. They sent in Marines, and first you have 50,000, then 100,000, then 200,000, and at the peak of this war, over 500,000 American troops will be fighting in this war, most of which were drafted. This is a unique experience in the American Army. If you think back to all of America's wars, from the American Revolution, War of 1812, the Mexican War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, these big wars, the Spanish-American War as well, I should put in there, the bulk of those armies were volunteer. Men volunteered to go. They volunteered to go by the thousands in the early war. They volunteered to go by the millions in World War I and World War II, volunteering to go. In Vietnam, it wasn't that way. The bulk of that army is a drafted army. Young boys who do not want to be there. That made a huge difference in this war. And again, if you're listening to this, you might want to stop and go back and hear me say that again, because it's very important to take note of that. This army is mostly a drafted army. Young boys who don't want to be there, they start to get angry over the fact that they're fighting a war in a place that they do not understand, against an enemy they clearly do not understand. It led to a high rate of drug use in the army, opium and marijuana especially. It also led to what was called fragging. Fragging is where soldiers begin to kill their officers. They did it by taking what was called a fragment of a grenade. They took the inside of a grenade, and when they would go out on missions, they would throw that at their company officer, killing them. So this is the kind of issue that you're dealing with. Now, I want to put a disclaimer out there, because I'm about to show another slide, and I know some of us are sensitive. Ananya, okay? I don't know if you need to look away for a little bit. Maybe just listen to what I'm going to say, but maybe this picture coming up, I don't know. Here we go. All right. America fought this war, and they said they were fighting for the hearts and minds of the South Vietnamese people. And it really isn't going to work. It's just not going to work at all. There's a lot of problems with this. First and foremost, America never understood the people of Vietnam. They thought at one point a civil war has broken out, because people in South Vietnam, we're going to talk about them here in just a moment, people of South Vietnam were fighting for the communists. So they saw it as a civil war. But it was actually a revolution that was taking place. Vietnam as a whole was fighting for its independence. And oftentimes, civilians were casualties of this, because you didn't know who the enemy was. They could be anywhere. Oftentimes, your friends were bombed. This is a famous moment where this village is bombed by napalm, fire bombs, and this poor little girl is caught on fire, and that's why she had to take her clothes off. And this is a famous picture. It won a Pulitzer Prize. This little girl eventually, she lives in Vietnam throughout much of her life, but her and her husband later on in the 80s or 90s, they're able to escape, and they now live in Canada. She's now a Canadian citizen today. But this just shows us just basically how terrible this war becomes. Actually, I should point out, though, that it was not the U.S. Army that bombed this peaceful village. It was the South Vietnamese Army, which was the ally of the United States. They're the ones who actually bombed this peaceful village. But Americans did the same thing throughout this war. And that gets us to the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong, basically Southern Vietnamese farmers. Right? They're people who live in South Vietnam, but they become communist, and they want to basically help North Vietnam take over their country. They want a revolution. They're fighting a revolution. They want a united Vietnam. They're tired of Vietnam being separated, and they see America as like what Americans would have saw Great Britain back in the 1700s, a colonial power that is just pushing them around. They're very patient. They were willing to accept many casualties. They fought a guerrilla-style warfare that America wasn't ready for, and they fought all over the place. They put booby traps all over the rice fields and in the village. They would hide in holes in the ground. They would hide in trees. And the American army was fighting literally in every direction. They were fighting all over South Vietnam with the Viet Cong. They were fighting the actual Viet Minh, Northern Army in the north. And this is what really turned this war into a major headache. Trying to fight two different groups of people who actually want the same thing, a united Vietnam, But America didn't understand that. They still thought this was a civil war and also a war of communist aggression. That's how America always saw that. You have news reporters who are here daily, beaming into your living rooms. This became a living room war. You could see every night live images of what was taking place. They were showing the death toll of American soldiers as it kept getting higher and higher and higher. And by 1967, American opinion begins to turn sharply against Lyndon Johnson and against the war, and mostly because of the Viet Minh. In December of 67, General Westmoreland, who was the general in charge of the army at the time, told America that the light is at the end of the tunnel, that the war is almost over, and the Viet Cong is nearly defeated, and the Viet Minh, the Northern Army of Vietnam, they can't press the war anymore. Well, January is a special occasion for people of Vietnam. That's their New Year's. They call it Tet. It's also a type of Day of the Dead as well. A lot of cultures around the world also celebrate Day of the Dead, and Tet is kind of a mixture of a New Year's, Day of the Dead celebration, and the whole country wants to celebrate this Tet. And so North Vietnam and South Vietnam call a truce, but it was a trick. The Tet Offensive, it began in January, and Tet 1 lasted from January to March, and then there will be a Tet 2 that happens in May. This was a massive, massive attack, surprise attack, coordinated attack by both the Northern Viet Minh and the Southern Viet Cong. They had hid everywhere during this day, and they surprise attacked. People were celebrating in the streets the day of New Year's, and everybody was kind of letting their guard down. Before you knew it, just chaos exploded. Bombs exploded, machine gun fire, people were taken by surprise. Over 100 cities in the South were attacked, 12 U.S. bases. They snuck onto 12 U.S. bases and attacked without the U.S. Army realizing what was going on. They also attacked the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. This was a major, major attack coordinated by the Viet Cong of the South and the Viet Minh, the actual army of North Vietnam. Now, America fights back. America fights back, and America wins the Battle of the Tet. You've got especially U.S. Marines in Saigon. Now, it's a bloody, bloody fight. This Tet Offensive, like I said, it began in January 68. The first Tet Offensive lasted till about March. And then there's a second surprise attack that begins in May and goes through August. America eventually crushes the Viet Cong out of this. More than 8,000 Viet Cong will be killed. Perhaps close to 30,000 Viet Minh of the Northern Vietnam Army is destroyed. So it is a major victory for the United States. The interesting thing about this war is the United States military never lost a single battle. Every battle that they fought against either the Viet Cong or the Viet Minh, the United States military won. But the problem was America never saw it that way. When Tet happened, they had just been told, like I told you, in December, they were being told that the light is at the end of the tunnel, the war is almost over. And then a month later, this massive surprise attack happens. All America saw was that the United States was lying to them. The government was lying. The military was lying. They saw that the resolve of the Southern Viet Cong was stronger than they thought, that the Northern Army of Vietnam was stronger than they thought. And many Americans now simply want out of the war. And hatred begins to grow for LBJ, for Lyndon Johnson. And this is what eventually ruins his political career. This literally ruins him, this Battle of Tet that happens in 68. And in class on Monday, I'm going to go into what happens to his administration as a counterculture revolution now begins in America. Young people begin to protest all over our country. It starts as a student movement, and it just eventually topples everything about Johnson. Everything about his great society, nobody cares anymore. All they care about is what's happening in Vietnam, and they see this as a lost cause. as far as Americans were concerned, it was a lost cause. Even though, again, like I said, the American military is winning every battle. They won the Battle of the Tet. But it was just, Americans just had enough. And this map too, by the way, I wanted to point out, when I keep saying the Ho Chi Minh Trail, see here's Laos and here's Cambodia. So they had these trails that would come out of, here's, it says North Vietnam there, and this is all of South Vietnam. So the trail would come out along the border from Laos into Cambodia and into parts all along South Vietnam. And that's how the North Vietnam kept arming the Viet Cong. They kept bringing supplies in there. And America will keep bombing all in Cambodia, and they'll bomb in Laos, trying to stop that. But oftentimes you weren't really sure where the trail was, where it began, or where it ended. Like I said, this was not an easy war. Oops. That was weird. All right, since I don't want to start this over again, but I want to go here. Yes, I do. Here we go. There we go. Sorry for the technical difficulties there. That was kind of strange. I don't know what happened. Who is the enemy? That became the huge problem here in this war. The enemy could be a child. This is a sad picture to look at, and perhaps Ananya, you want to look away again. Look away, Ananya. I'm sorry. I should have warned you. Sorry about that. You've got young boys who are coming into camp every day to try and play baseball or to goof off and tell jokes with the American Army. And one day they come in and they want to play baseball, but they throw a hand grenade instead into a tent and kill a bunch of American soldiers. They're part of the Viet Cong. You have villages that are in South Vietnam where there's old men and women, and maybe they're doing the laundry for the local military base. Maybe they're coming in and doing some cleaning work. You're going in there, you're eating meals with them, but they're members of the Viet Cong. They're poisoning your food. They're blowing up things. So you just don't know who the enemy is anymore. And that led to a terrible moment called the My Lai Massacre that also happens in 1968, where Americans go into a village, a hamlet called My Lai, and they're not sure who the enemy is. Very much like this. And they begin to take every old person out. And in My Lai, when they attacked this village, there are only the elderly, children, and women. There weren't any young men. And there's a ditch. Yeah, there's a ditch in the back of this hamlet. They pour about 500 people into this ditch, and the American military execute them. Charlie Company does this. It's a small unit of men that go into My Lai. It's Charlie Company, 1st Battalion of the 20th Infantry. A Lieutenant William Calley was their platoon leader, and they had enough. The My Lai is part of the Tet Offensive, and they just couldn't decide who was the enemy anymore, so they decided to massacre everybody in that village. There are other people in the army that saw this taking place, and eventually the military tried to keep it a secret, but eventually it gets out, and in 1970, 1972, there's going to be a trial of these men. Lieutenant Calley will go on trial. He will not be found guilty, but he will be discharged from the military. And this is a famous moment that was shown on TV. This is a South Vietnamese army general. He's the South Vietnamese army. Remember, that's the ally of America. This man was a Viet Cong, and interrogating him, he executed him on television. And these are the things, again, that made America sick to their heart. They couldn't take the fact that children were fighting this war, that old people were being massacred, that people were getting shot in the streets live on television. So all of this led to America wanting to get out of the Vietnam War. All right. So like I said, Monday in class, we'll pick this up with the counterculture revolution. I hope you guys have a great Saturday and Sunday. The video log is already posted to Edmodo, and I'll see you guys later.